Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Warpath, the podcast chronicling the history of the Buffalo Sabres. On this episode, we will explore year one of the Sabres' existence. We'll dig into some of the background on how Punch and Black formed Buffalo's roster for their first season on the ice in the NHL, and we'll dig into some of the ups and downs the team would face on the ice as they went through their inaugural NHL season. This episode won't chronicle each and every game, though we will highlight various stretches and chunks of their first season as we try to highlight some of the more interesting pieces and stories from the building of their roster and the debut of the Buffalo Sabres in the NHL.
My brother Nori and I are by no means known as gamblers. However, in 1970, we gambled that Buffalo would be a great place for a National Hockey League franchise.
Corner Robert going after it, he scores! Corner Robert! A backhand in front! Hatchick with a miraculous save! Here come the Buffalo Sabres!
What name comes to mind when I say the first Sabre? I think for many, the first name that would spring to mind would be Gilbert Perreault, and it's a fair assumption, as he was the club's first draft pick and one of their cornerstone talents. But it wouldn't be quite accurate to call Gilbert Perreault the first Sabre, because in the run-up to their first season and under the guidance of George Punch and Black, the Sabres selected Kevin O'Shea with one of their four selections in the NHL's Interleague Draft on June 9th, 1970. O'Shea played 93 games for the Sabres, and he carries the distinction of being the club's very first acquisition. Now, the Interleague Draft was an off-season selection process that was held for 8 seasons. It ended in 1974, and it was a vehicle for teams to select players from other minor professional leagues. The Interleague Draft was one of several off-season drafts the league held, in addition to the amateur draft that we all know and love today. Buffalo was the only team to make any selections in the 1970 Interleague Draft, as the Canucks were a former Western Hockey League club, the professional iteration, not the Canadian Major Junior League that operates today. As a Western Hockey League team entering the NHL, the Canucks were excluded from the process of the Interleague Draft, as they already had several minor league players on their roster. The 4 picks the Sabres made in total included O'Shea, Cliff Schmaltz, Brian McDonald, and Bill Inglis. The Interleague Draft was a function of the days of hockey in the NHL when it wasn't uncommon to see players traded for cash, and the lines between the various professional hockey leagues around the continent were much blurrier. After all, it was just 2 years later that the World Hockey Association officially started as a legitimate rival to the NHL, in addition to several other pro leagues that existed at the time. The function of the Interleague Draft was to allow NHL teams to select players off minor league rosters in order to further bolster the talent on their respective NHL rosters. Minor league teams weren't completely left out by the Interleague Draft, as the draft itself had a sister, which was the reverse draft, and that allowed minor teams to select players off NHL rosters. It was designed to provide minor league clubs an additional avenue of securing players, as NHL teams were regularly promoting players from their minor league clubs, leaving those teams thin on talent. In effect, the 2 drafts served as a complement to one another, as NHL teams could use the Interleague Draft to pull talent from minor leagues up to the NHL level, and in turn, those minor league teams could take fringe players and players on the bubble of a roster and keep themselves competitive within their own respective leagues. If you're ever in the mood to have some fun with defunct hockey team names, have a look at some of the clubs that made selection in the various reverse drafts, which ran until 1974. The expansion era of the NHL had a lot of interesting roster machinations, and the intra-league draft was another off-season vehicle that the NHL utilized throughout this time frame. From 1952 until 1975, the intra-league draft ran. That's in addition to the interleague draft. And it took a 1-year hiatus before being reorganized as the waiver draft. And it actually ran from 1976 till 2003, believe it or not. Now, the intra-league draft was implemented as a tool to introduce more parity to the league, different from the interleague draft, which was used to exchange players between the NHL and minor leagues. Specifically, it was introduced for the Rangers and Blackhawks, who were the whipping boys of the original 6. The intra-league draft would allow teams to select players from each other for a fee, $10,000 to start. The theory was that teams like the Rangers and Blackhawks, who were short on talent, could select fringe players from the league's elite teams as a way to bolster their depth and overall talent. By allowing each team to protect 20 skaters and 2 goalies, the idea was that no team would risk losing their most important players, but deeper teams who regularly competed for the Stanley Cup would be forced to expose middle-of-the-road players who could then improve the stock of the league's bottom feeders. It wasn't much of an event at first. No players were selected in 1952, 1953, or 1955, and only one player was selected in 1954. The league tweaked the rules here and there. For example, they dropped the protection from 20 to 18 skaters, and they eventually would move the draft from just before training camp to a date earlier in the summer, closer to the league's entry draft. The practice finally picked up steam in the late 1950s and was even subject to a bit of Punch Imlach's tomfoolery in 1971 when he took advantage of the rules to stag 4 additional players after the rest of the league's clubs had finished their selections. 2 of the most notable names picked by the Sabres in the intra-league draft were René Robert in 1971 and Tim Horton in 1972. The Sabres actually lost Robert in that same 1971 draft, having to trade for him later down the line. We'll have more on Robert, of course, and the French Connection as a whole in a later episode. As it relates to the Sabres' inaugural season, the interleague draft took place shortly after the intra-league draft on June 9th, 1970. So just to be clear, and so that everyone understands the different dates, the different drafts that are being thrown around here, the order of drafting went as follows. The NHL's intra-league draft was held on June 9th, 1970. The Sabres did not select any players in that draft. Again, that was designed for existing NHL teams to make selections from other NHL rosters, so the Sabres were unable to make selections as a result. On that same day, June 9th, 1970, the league also held the interleague draft, which is the league draft that allowed teams to select players from minor league clubs, and the Sabres selected their first 4 roster players. That included, as mentioned at the top of the show, Kevin O'Shea. June 10th, 1970, was the NHL expansion draft, when the Sabres would make a number of selections. And then on June 11th, 1970, was the NHL's amateur draft for the 1970-71 season. A day after selecting O'Shea, Schmaltz, McDonald, and Inglis in the interleague draft, the Sabres enjoyed a bit of good fortune with the league's draft lottery and won the right to select first in the expansion draft on June 10th, and the entry draft, then known as the amateur draft, on June 11th. Now, this is one of the most famous and notable stories in Sabres history, but there is some debate over how things went. At the very least, there are various accounts differing slightly on how the story is told. In order to determine the order for both the expansion and amateur drafts, the Sabres and Canucks would have to spin a carnival wheel, or roulette wheel, for the right to pick first in each draft. Among the disputed facts I've personally encountered is the manner in which the wheel was numbered. Some have said it was numbered from 1 to 20, but official accounts verify the wheel was actually numbered 1 through 13, with number 7 being an unassigned control number. 2 spins would determine the order of the 2 drafts, with the first spin dedicated to the expansion draft. In both instances, Imlach chose the higher set of numbers. As legend has it, he did so because his favorite number was 11. A serendipitous bit of superstition, should those rumors indeed be true. Buffalo won the first selection in the expansion draft as the wheel landed on number 8. Then came the more dramatic and certainly more valuable spin, as the winning team for the amateur draft would have the right to select Gilbert Perreault first overall. Perreault had just scored 121 points for the Montreal Junior Canadiens of the Ontario Hockey Association. His 51 goals in 54 games came a year after a 37-goal, 97-point performance in 1968-1969. He was the undisputed number 1 pick for the 1970 draft and a vital building block for any franchise, particularly a pair of expansion clubs. Campbell's next spin of the wheel would be the one that would create the drama and an infamous bit of Sabres lore.
The first spin would determine whether Buffalo or Vancouver would get first choice in the expansion draft.
Remember, it's Buffalo high, Vancouver low.
Buffalo had won first choice of the players in the expansion draft. Then came the all-important second spin.
Number is 1.
Number 1, Vancouver the winner. But wait, it's 2 ones, 11. The Sabres had also landed first choice in the amateur draft.
They had a very makeshift crown and anchor wheel set up.
I was confused what happened, like everyone else was.
I think it fell over before they got started. It was not well done at all.
It was a different era and different times, and it would never happen again, and it never did happen again.
In 1970, NHL President Clarence Campbell decreed that the draft order of the expansion Buffalo Sabres and Vancouver Canucks would be determined by the spin of a carnival wheel.
Number is 1.
After the wheel was spun, Mr. Campbell said, "Oh, Vancouver gets the first pick."
The wheel landed on 11, and Mr. Campbell misread it.
Punch Imlach at their table said, "Mr. Campbell, just check that wheel. I think it's on number 11.
That audio detailing the spin, the error in calling the selection, and the elation from the Buffalo table came from a short film produced by the Sabres called Buffalo Ready. Further audio is from a Sportsnet feature on how the spin of that wheel affected the fortunes of both the Sabres and the Canucks. The issue came as a result of the unique layout of the wheel. It required that double-digit numbers be arranged vertically as opposed to side by side. So, for the number 11, one number on top, one number just below it. This made it easy to quickly glance at the number the wheel stopped on and think it was just the number 1 due to that layout. However, the wheel had indeed landed on, of all numbers, Imlach's lucky number and the jersey number of the player who would be his franchise cornerstone, number 11. Here is Imlach offering some thoughts on winning the lottery, once again from the film Buffalo Ready.
Punch, I've always known you were a lucky man, but Lady Luck was right in your hip pocket today.
Well, I've always said it's better to be lucky than good, and I'm quite happy with the way things went this afternoon.
Well, tell us how you felt when that roulette wheel was spinning down there.
Well, actually, naturally, it's quite... you wonder what's going to happen. Of course, we won the first one, and we'd won the toss before, and said, well, it's not... the odds are starting to go against you. And, of course, I think when they called out the number, I wasn't looking at it. I was looking down at the paper trying to do something, and they said number 1. Well, that's it. But then it came back, it was 2 ones, and it was number 11, and we won, and I think the heart just turned right over, started to pound pretty good, because it's very important that that was the one to really win.
Number 11, of course, is the number that Gilles Perreault wears. Now, can we assume from this that you're going to draft Gilles Perreault number 1 tomorrow?
I would assume that you could say that I'm going to take Gilles Perreault tomorrow.
Who would you rate him with as a junior? Beliveau?
Well, because he's French-Canadian, Perreault, Beliveau, I don't think that's really fair, because Beliveau's been in the league. He set all the records, and why would you try to saddle a kid with that kind of... I'll be just happy if Perreault can play up to the expectations that everybody thinks he can.
Buffalo selected Perreault a day after making 20 selections in the NHL's expansion draft. Among the selections were 4-time Cup winner Phil Goyette, 5-time Cup winner Don Marshall, and future captain and general manager Jerry Meehan. Imlach also swung a deal with Detroit to acquire goaltender Roger Crozier, a trade that wound up being a key piece of business for the team's early years. Overall, Buffalo's roster would be shaped slightly differently. Some players would be mixed in and out through trades such as Roger Crozier, but Buffalo's yield from the NHL expansion draft is as follows. The Sabres selected goaltenders Gary Edwards and Norm Farr from St. Louis and Montreal, respectively, and the skaters the team would select were Doug Barry, Craig Cameron, Chris Evans, Reg Fleming, Phil Goyette, Al Hamilton, Skip Crackey, Francois Lacombe, Jean-Guy Legacy, Donnie Marshall, Mike McMahon, Jerry Meehan, Howie Menard, Brian Perry, Tracy Pratt, Paul Turnbench, Jim Watson, and Tom Webster. You can commit those names to memory if you wish, in the event you're ever asked a very obscure question about the 1970 NHL expansion draft. Save for Perreault, the team's first foray at the draft table was a forgettable one. Only 3 other picks played NHL games, and of that trio, Randy Wierzub gave the Sabres the most return with a paltry 18 points over 100 career games. Imlach surely wouldn't mind the lack of late-round success in his first draft. After landing Perreault, he'd have plenty of success in the following years, and the task at hand was preparing his team for their forced foray in the NHL. Imlach is described in the 1970-71 Sabres media guide as, quote, hockey's most colorful and quotable coach, with a, quote, dry acerbic wit that is as much an Imlach characteristic as the intriguing hats he manages to come up with to wear behind the player's bench. He came to Buffalo after being fired by Toronto the prior April. He had helmed the Leafs as both coach and GM for 11 seasons prior, capturing 4 Stanley Cups and falling in the finals on 2 other occasions. Imlach brought the Leafs to the Cup Finals in 1958-1959, his first season in charge of the team. They fell to Montreal in that series in the following year as well. Interestingly, the Sabres' 1970-71 media guide actually credits Imlach for winning the Cup in that first season, but in fact his first title wouldn't come until 1962, a date that may stand out to you if you're a fan of the Tragically Hip. Imlach would triumph in the finals in 1963 and 1964 as well, and would win his final Cup in 1967, another year that holds quite a bit of weight in Leafs lore. His coaching career in Buffalo would only last a season and a half, as health issues forced him to step down from behind the bench in 1971-1972. His coaching record with the Sabres was 32, 62, and 25. He would remain as the team's general manager, though, until 1978. Imlach's Sabres took the ice for the first time on October 10, 1970, against the Pittsburgh Penguins. The first players on the ice for the team were goaltender Roger Crozier, defenseman Paul Turnbench and Tracy Pratt, who led the Sabres in penalty minutes, and forwards Ron Anderson, Hat Myers, and Bill Inglis. Jim Watson holds the honor of scoring the first goal in franchise history, tallying the marker at 5:01 of the second period against the Penguins. Who else but Gilbert Perreault would slot home the winner, giving the Sabres a 2-1 victory in their inaugural game. Here's a brief highlight package from... Here's a bit of audio and a brief highlight package from that inaugural victory for the Sabres.
But the tenacious checking of the young Buffalo team, combined with the first and career goal for defenseman Jim Watson, the first in league history for Buffalo, gave the Sabres a lead. Then rookie Gilles Perreault scored the winner for team first win and first goal by the talented young center.
The team's first loss would come 4 days later, a 3-0 defeat at the hands of the New York Rangers, while their first home game came on October 15, 1970, against the mighty Montreal Canadiens.
National Hockey League President Clarence Campbell, Sabres President Seymour Knox, Canadiens President David Molson, and Buffalo Mayor Sedita were among the dignitaries present for the opening ceremonies at Center Ice. Canadiens great captain John Beliveau and Sabres captain Floyd Smith went for the official draw. Then came the game. The Sabres, eager to win in their first home game, were no match for Beliveau, J.C. Tremblay, Richard and company. Roger Crozier, easily the most outstanding Sabre in the first third of the season, made saves which ranged from the miraculous to the routinely sensational as he kept the Sabres in the game through the early going despite a bombardment of over 20 shots a period. It was the first on-ice meeting of Perreault and Beliveau, his schoolboy idol. The Canadiens' vast experience, coupled with solid defensive play, and goalie Phil Meare's quick glove hand kept Buffalo off the score sheet.
That 3-0 loss, detailed in the 1970-1971 season recap film dubbed Touché, set the Sabres on a rocky first half of their inaugural season. In fact, it would be nearly 2 full weeks after their opening night win over Pittsburgh for the Sabres to notch their second win, a 4-3 victory over Detroit on October 23rd. The Sabres won only 7 games between October and the end of December 1970. They were 7-22-6 after a 5-2 win over Detroit on December 27th. That stretch included losing streaks of 3, 5, and 7 games, and the team didn't win more than 1 game consecutively in that entire stretch. The best that they would muster was a 2-0-1 unbeaten streak with a 2-2 tie against Montreal, sandwiched between a 4-2 win over California and a 7-2 win over Toronto. But the Sabres found their stride in the new year. From January 1st through the end of the season, the team went 17, 18, and 9 and enjoyed their first set of back-to-back wins on January 14th and 16th over St. Louis, a 2-1 victory, and Minnesota a 4-3 triumph. Their first true winning streak came with a trio of wins on the West Coast while they dispatched California, Vancouver, and Los Angeles. Perhaps their most impressive stretch came in the final month of the season when they went 7-3-4. You can even push that to 8-3-4 if you wish to include their final win of February. That record was helped by a 5-game unbeaten streak that closed the season. Those results were as follows: a 3-1 win over Vancouver on March 26th, 4-2 win over Minnesota on March 28th, 6-4 win over Pittsburgh on March 31st, a 3-3 tie against Pittsburgh on April 1st, and a 3-3 tie against Philadelphia on April 4th. The Sabres would wrap their first season 24-39-15. Good for 63 points and 19 behind Toronto for the last playoff spot in the East Division. Perreault, of course, was the star. He finished 6th in the league with 38 goals and 15th with 72 points. It was a new rookie record. He was the first Sabre to bring home hardware. He won the Calder Trophy as the league's top rookie for the 70-71 season. He would also represent the Sabres at the 1971 All-Star Game. Some other interesting facts and figures from that first season. The Salt Lake Golden Eagles served as Buffalo's farm team for that first inaugural year. The Sabres had 79 players at their first training camp. Floyd Smith was the first captain in franchise history. Reg Fleming would set a high bar for penalty minutes in a single game, piling up 39 in the 5th game of the season. The official record of that game shows 2 minutes for elbowing, 2 for roughing, 5 for fighting, and 30 minutes in misconduct. Ironically, it all came just 39 seconds into that game against Pittsburgh. It was a fairly successful first season for the Sabres. It would have been a tall order to sneak into the playoffs in the East Division, where 5 of the league's original 6 franchises competed. Their second half success laid the foundation for optimism for the seasons to come. It was something echoed by both Imlach and Seymour Knox as the season wrapped.
Well, Punch, the first season is now on record. The Sabres finished higher than I think that a lot of people expected.
Well, a lot of people I would go along with, but not higher than some people expected. Of course, you know how I feel about it. I'd like to have been in the playoffs, but I guess we have to be thankful for small mercies. The team played very well. Everybody, I think, played as just about as good as they could, and after all, that's all that counts.
Well, Punch, the Sabres finished in 5th place this year in the Eastern Division. Do you have any predictions for next season?
Well, we're playing since Christmas 500%. That means that over that long period of time, it wasn't just a mistake, it's a fact. And what we have to do is try and make it better next year, play maybe 60 or 65%. And of course, to do that, we're going to have to get a couple of more hockey players better than what we have, or we hope that we can get them better than what we have. And if we can improve just that small 10, 15%, we'll be in the playoffs next year.
I've been very proud of our Buffalo Sabres in this, our very first season of the National Hockey League this year. Been simply delighted the way they've played on the ice, and even more excited about the way the fans on the Niagara Frontier have responded to our team. I'm sure that Punch and Black will have even better teams for us here in the future, and I'm sure also that it won't be too long before we'll be in the Stanley Cup. So thank you very much for your support, and I hope that you fans will be coming back to the Memorial Auditorium, and we'll see even better hockey from here on in the future.
Buffalo's first season had come to a close, and with one of the league's brightest stars at the core of their roster. It was on Imlach to find the right pieces to complement Perreault as the Sabres prepared to take the steps towards a Stanley Cup. Special thanks for this episode to Buffalo Archives Now on YouTube for permission to use archival audio from their library of Buffalo sports videos. Additional information on the references for this episode can be found in the show notes, as the references include Buffalo Archives Now, Sportsnet, the Buffalo News, Hockey Reference, the Buffalo Sabres 1970-71 Media Guide, and historicalhockey.blogspot.com. Next time on Warpath, the Sabres Ascendance.